Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world right now. Welcome to the Happy Hour Live webcast from WhiskyCast.com. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio, and there's no guest today. Today, we're going to do something incredibly different, and this is either going to be really good or it's going to be a disaster. We're going to find out over the next few minutes because we're going to fuel this by your questions. It's Ask Mark Anything time. Excuse me. The reason we're doing this is because the live webcasts are going to take a pause for the rest of the summer, July and August. We'll return after Labor Day in early September with something new. Not sure yet how it's going to work webcast wise. It may just be more of the same. Let me sort of explain my thinking here to you in that we started these webcasts back in March of 2020 during the pandemic when people needed content because we were all stuck at home and we didn't have any place to go and we needed something to keep us occupied. So we started the webcast and it sort of took on a life of its own. And we've been continuing it ever since. I've taken August off the last couple of years, but we're going to take July and August off because I'm wondering whether it's time to reimagine the webcast as something different, maybe a combination of live interviews and pre-taped interviews, maybe more of your questions, maybe even a co-host. I'm open to suggestions and ideas, and I don't know yet where this is going to go, but I want to take a couple of months to think about it. We've got some other stuff we need to do around here too, like redesigning a website that has been unchanged since 2013. It's time to freshen the website, so we need to put some work into that. Frankly, I need to dust all these bottles off behind me. That alone is going to take a full week at least, stripping all the bottles down off the shelves. So we're going to do something, and as Bill Ricker puts it, now for something completely different. Missed that chance, but yeah. This is going to be fueled by your questions. It's your chance to ask me anything you've ever wanted to ask, and I will answer to the best of my ability. We are not going to do WhiskyCast karaoke, as Christopher Malloy said. I am not going to inflict that upon you, gang. That would be cruel and unusual punishment that would violate the Geneva Conventions if I were to sing openly in public. So let's start off with Matt. Any standout bottlings since you last took our questions? Well, the last time we did this was for the 15th anniversary of WhiskyCast when it was in the fall of 2020. And I believe Chris Ratcliffe was asking the questions that time around. Chris is in the room right now. He may remember this and want to chime in. Standout bottlings, the Glenlivet 80-year-old comes to mind. It's the only one that's come out in the last year and a half that I've scored 98 points. And before I get to it, because I know this question is going to come up whether I have a favorite whiskey or not, my standard stock response is that I have not found it yet, largely because I haven't tasted them all. There are 9 whiskeys that I have scored 98 points. And let me just show you the graphic real quickly here. We can go through it. We start with that Glenlivet 80-year-old. And then, just a second here. Let me pull the question down. The original Redbreast Dream Cask, 32 years old, from 4 or 5 years ago, was the last one. Before that, I scored 98 points. Highland Park, the 1968 distillery exclusive, which was a vatting of several 1968 casks that they made available only at the distillery, and I got to taste during a visit to Orkney. That was a 98-pointer. The Glenfiddich 50-year-old was one of the early 98 pointers from about 2008 or so. 3 from 1964, the Old Forester President's Choice that was bottled in 1964 that I had the chance to taste at Brown-Forman headquarters during a special tasting with Chris Morris several years ago. The Bowmore 1964 Fino Sherry Cask, back when Bowmore was releasing some 1964s in that 2007-2008 time range, on the range of one a year until they had exhausted most of their casks. That's where that gold Bowmore 64 came from too. The one Japanese whiskey on there is the Kurosawa 1960 single cask, number 5627, which I believe was a number one drinks company bottling that I tasted in and around one of the whiskey shows in London. And then finally, the Gordon and MacPhail Generations Mortlach 70 years old, which was one that, if you listen back to one of my very first visits to Scotland, I got to taste that with Michael Urquhart in the Gordon and MacPhail warehouse in Elgin. So those are the ones I've scored 98 points. And so if I had to pick a favorite, it would be from among those. But the next question comes from Matt also. Do you have a distillery bucket list? And if so, who is at the top? Let me pour a drink while I think about that one here. By the way, I should have said at the start, Happy Canada Day. This is the anniversary of Canadian Confederation. So in honor of Canada Day, I'm opening a J.P. Weiser's 23-year-old Cask-Strength, 64% ABV. So if I have a couple of these, things are going to get real interesting before long. Distillery bucket list. There are many distilleries I have yet to visit. I've not been to Talisker, Oban, Dalwhinnie, just to name two or three. I've not been to Bladnoch. I've not been to Edradour. I've probably been to 80 distilleries around the world, but those are a couple in Scotland. I've not been to Bushmills yet. Ironically, today would have been the day that I would have been visiting Bushmills had I not contracted COVID several weeks ago, because I was scheduled to be in Ireland this week and I would have been at Bushmills today. And we might very well have been doing this webcast from Bushmills. So that's one I would like to visit. I would like to visit Stauning in Denmark. I would like to visit Tor Christensen's distillery up in Norway. Tor is a frequent participant in these webcasts. I would like to visit the distilleries in Japan. I've not been to Japan yet. I would like to visit Yamazaki and Yoichi. I would love to visit the new Kurosawa when it opens up. Let's see, which other ones am I thinking of? Nika, okay, Yamazaki, Yoichi, Hokkaido. No, Hokkaido's where they're located. Oh, they'll come to me in a minute or two. Hakushu is definitely one I want to visit. Those are the ones that are sort of on my bucket list that I would like to get to. Let's see. Tyrone Coty, hello from sunny Nova Scotia. Cheers, Tyrone. Happy Canada Day. Oh, that's good. Christopher Malloy says, hello from hot and smelly Brooklyn. David Owen, hello, Mark and everyone. All well? All is well here. I am finally over COVID. Still a little bit of a fog occasionally and a little bit of a scratchy throat, but I'm pretty much back to normal now. Question from Chris Ratcliffe. If you were to start up Gillespie's Special Reserve Distillery, what would be the whiskey style and ethos? Oh, God. I have absolutely no desire to open a distillery. I would rather drink everybody else's whiskey than try to make my own, because I know that I cannot make it nearly as well as the experts out there, the folks like Jimmy Russell, Maureen Robinson, the master blender at Diageo, who retired this week after 45 years, just a few months after Dr. Jim Beveridge retired at Diageo. I can't make it as well as those folks, so there's no way I would even try. But if I were going to, it probably would be a single malt. It probably would be peated. It would have to depend on where the distillery was being built. That's not going to happen. So I would have to say it would be a peated single malt of some type. That's an interesting question, though. From Spirit Bomb, Tabitha, any guests you'd love to have on but have not been able to yet? Yeah. I want Bob Dalgarno, who was the whiskey maker at the Macallan for years and then is now working with the Glen Turret. Bob does not like to do interviews, and I've called him out a couple of times. I want him to come on the show, either on the webcast or on the regular podcast. I want Bob Dalgarno on because I want to talk about his long career in whiskey making. That's been about it. Generally, I've been able to get just about everybody we want on the show. There's been at one point or another. So, virtual tastings. The virtual tastings podcast was what we started out with. We did that for several years with a tasting panel, and I think that's what Matt's referring to here. We might be able to bring virtual tastings back as part of a reimagined webcast. I hate thinking about that, though, because it would mean telling you ahead of time what we're going to taste and then having you source it, because I'm not in the position, being in the U.S., to send samples out internationally or even domestically. But it's an idea. Malt Mariners, bonsoir from the French Atlantic coast. Bonsoir. Cheers, Santé, Malt Mariners. Let's see. Least favorite whiskey you can mention. Oh, yeah. Got it somewhere around here. This one. The infamous PBR, Pabst Blue Ribbon whiskey, and they're using that term very loosely because this thing was matured for all of 5 seconds. As it says right here on the label, aged 5 seconds. Basically, they dribbled it over oak, and that's how they got it aged. It is a butyric, nasty, god-awful whiskey that I think I scored 40 points, which is what I scored the legendary Fischke, which was created for a whiskey shop in, I believe, Germany. There's a whole story about it on our website. And it was a Bruichladdich cask that was then recast. Half of that cask was put into a herring barrel. And that was just absolutely god-awful. Mike Simpson. Hey, since it's Canada Day, what is your favorite Canadian whiskey? Ooh, that's a good question. I don't really have a favorite Canadian whiskey. I've not scored any 98 points, but let me just go back to the website for a second here, and let's figure out. I'm going to do this. I'm not even going to try to share the screen, just because I can't easily do it. Let me pull up the tasting notes and see what my highest scoring Canadian whiskey is. You can do this yourself too. If you go to our website, go to the tasting notes section, you can type in, you can search by distillery or even country or even by the very score. That's how I got the 98 point list just earlier, was scoring it. The Canadian Club Chronicles 43-year-old The Speakeasy. I'm looking at the bottle right now. I scored that 95 points last year. Let's see. I also scored, that's the highest scoring Canadian whiskey. I scored the 42-year-old Chronicles, the Dockman, a 94 the year before. So if I had to put a favorite on it, it would be the Canadian Club Chronicles 43-year-old, although there are many whiskeys that I enjoy from Canada. I sort of consider it almost a second home up there and would love to live there someday. And there are times when I want to rethink some of my ratings, like when I'm sipping this Weiser's 23-year-old. As Bill Ricker points out, Weiser's, good choice for Canada Day. The comments on that 98 point list from Tabitha, all bargain whiskeys there. Yep. Christopher Malloy, all made from unobtainium. Yeah. Malt Mariners, what a dream lineup. Let's just show that graphic again because I can, with some of your comments over it. From Bill Ricker, my Gordon MacPhail Glen Grant 58 Blood Tub didn't make 98. I don't think I did tasting notes for that one, Bill. I think that's one we just enjoyed without worrying about doing tasting notes on it. So no. And as Whiskey Canuck points out, that's a heck of a flight. Richard Dankovic, what was your favorite event that you attended? Which one stands out the most in your memory? Well, favorite event. Oh, let me bring that question back up and bring the graphic back down. Favorite event would, over the years, has been the Victoria Whiskey Festival. I went every year pre-pandemic for about 11 years in a row, and it is one of my favorite events anywhere in the world. Other events that I've enjoyed, I love going to New Brunswick for the New Brunswick Spirits Festival each November, and I'm looking forward to going back this November for the first time in a couple of years. I love going to the Whiskey Show in London. I love going to Whiskey Live in Paris, because those shows tend to bring out a lot of whiskeys that we never get to see here in the States or in Canada. So it becomes, it's a chance for me to explore and find some stuff that I'll never get to try elsewhere. Spirit Bomb wants to know, have I tried Gold Spot yet? Yes, I have, and I shared my tasting notes for it a couple of weeks ago. Spoiler alert, I liked it. 9 years old from Mitchell & Sons. It celebrates the 135th anniversary of Mitchell & Son, the independent wine and spirits broker in Dublin. Let me get this thing off the shelf before it makes me sick. Ugh. Can't even bear to look at that thing. Let's see. Christopher Malloy, I imagine Maine would be a wonderful place to open a malt whiskey distillery. I think it's a great idea, Christopher. I know there are distilleries in Maine. I don't know who's doing single malt or if anybody's doing single malt up there. Mia Geekyo, yes. Thank you, Donner Pass. That was the one I was trying to think of. And Tabitha Spirit Bomb, if you go to Japan, get in touch with Mac from Kanpai Planet. Sounds really good. Comment from Tyrone Cote. What I like about the current format is that you expose us to people we might not have met before, and after we meet them and learn a bit about them, we get to ask questions. Please keep that. That is one of the things that I've enjoyed about this format, is that we bring up people that you might not have met otherwise or might not hear about, especially from the craft distilling movement. And I think that that's one of the things we will continue. I just want to make sure that we're actually delivering the content that you want to watch and that you're willing to give us 45 minutes of an hour to your time for. Bill Ricker points out it's also Happy Bobby Bonilla Day to those who celebrate. This is going to require some explanation. Bobby Bonilla is a retired baseball player. And on July 1st every year, basically, he signed one of these deferred money contracts where basically the New York Mets agreed to pay him $1.2 million every year for something like 25 years, instead of buying out his contract for $6 million, because the owners of the Mets got caught up in the whole Bernie Madoff thing, and they thought putting that money into Madoff's Ponzi scheme would be more profitable than just cutting Bonilla a check for $5.9 million. So they basically agreed to pay him a lot more money over a lot more years. So every year on July 1st, Bobby collects a $1.2 million check from the Mets, and thus it is Bobby Bonilla Day. Whiskey Canuck also says the humidity says hi from Montreal. It is humid here too. We're waiting for storms to come in tonight. Tyrone points out I'd really like to see more of the Irish distillers, Bushmills, and some of the new smaller ones. So would I, and that's one of the things I'll keep in mind when we bring the webcasts back, is maybe getting some of those folks on. One of the other people I mentioned when it was asked if there's guests I haven't had on that I'd like to have on, Helen Mulholland, who recently retired as master blender for Bushmills and just came out of retirement to work for Loch Gill, Sazerac's new distillery that it just bought in Ireland. I would love to have Helen on the show sometime, and I'm hoping we can make that happen, especially since she got out of retirement to come work for them. Let's see. Tyrone Cote, if Fishki got a 40, what does rubbing alcohol get? No rating, because you don't drink rubbing alcohol, Tyrone. You know better than that. Malt Mariners. I recently tasted a whiskey finished in a German cucumber vinegar cask. It was shockingly quite tasty, if you ask me. I think somebody pointed out Chris Ratcliffe points out that sounds like a pre-made pickleback. Ugh, I'm not sure I'd want to try that one, but okay. Whiskey Canuck also thinks his would be the favorite Canadian whiskey would be the Weiser's 35, but he hasn't had any true brewers yet. And yeah, you've got to have some true brewers before you can make that decision. Let's see. Tyrone Cote says the Alberta Premium Cask-Strength is about as subtle as a Mike Tyson slap. I almost pulled that one off the shelf. Instead, I decided to go for the Weiser's 23, but that Alberta Premium Cask-Strength is within reach. I might just reach over and grab it before we get done here. Charlie Prince from the Drammers Club. Hi, Charlie. Have you ever considered moving to a less regrettably dry county to be a little closer to the people making your favorite beverage? No. I like living here, even though, yes, I'm in a regrettably dry town. The county is wet. The town itself of Haddonfield is mostly dry. We have a brew pub now, and there are a couple of places that sell wine under winery licenses, but basically, where I am, I'm 25 minutes from Philadelphia Airport, which means I can get to anywhere I need to be in the world fairly easily, because I can get to Europe anywhere. I can get to Kentucky, Tennessee easily, any of the distilleries around the U.S. easily. Canada, I can get to. I don't want to go back to the Midwest. I grew up in the Midwest, in Indiana, and not going back. I'm not going back there because I just don't want to. Let's see. And we'll leave it at that. Bill Ricker points out there is whiskey in Maine. His cousins haven't upgraded their license yet, but stay tuned. Let us know. Tyrone Cote, speaking of the Spot series, the prices of some of the new Irish whiskeys is giving him a brown spot. Oh, yeah, we got a Code Brown alert there. The first one of the show. Juan Cruz thinks Maine would be a great place for a distillery, too. There are distilleries in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia just to the east of Maine. So, yeah, let's see about getting a malt distillery in in Maine, not Spain. Let's see. The rain in Maine falls mainly on the plain. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Tongue twisters, tongue twisters, tongue twisters. Spirit Bomb points out that he doesn't want to see Mark combust live. And as Bill Ricker points out, being in a dry town means I've got the best whiskey bar in town. Yeah. Without that, I think even if they did have bars in town, I'd probably still have the best whiskey bar in town. Spirit Bomb talking of Ponzi schemes. What do you think of whiskey NFTs? Not much. NFT, in my opinion, stands for no bleeping time. I may be showing my boomerism here, but I don't quite understand how buying a picture of something is equivalent to buying the real thing, or buying an image that gives you the right to a bottle of whiskey that's in a safe somewhere. I don't like it. I think there's plenty of issues with trading them. I'm not a big fan of whiskey NFTs. Let's see. Most underrated bourbon and rye brands to fill up Malt Mariner's bucket list. Well, since you're joining us from the coast of France, it's going to be kind of hard for you to get some of the underrated ones. I think underrated Jeptha Creed, Nelson's Greenbrier whiskey is underrated as a bourbon, as far as a whiskey goes. Frey Ranch is very underrated, but they're basically sold in the Western U.S. and not even close to exporting yet. Those are just a couple of the three I'm thinking of. There's all kinds of very underrated ones. Smooth Ambler is underrated, in my opinion. The stuff coming out of Few Spirits is really good. Widow Jane. If you can get your hands on Widow Jane, go for it, especially their 10 years and older expressions. Go for those. Let's see. Chris Ratcliffe, as I'm on a WhistlePig tip at the moment, what are your memories of WhistlePig opening and developing during your podcast tenure? I can't talk about WhistlePig without talking about the late, great Dave Pickerel, who was the genius behind WhistlePig. He didn't found the brand, but he was the first consultant and the master distiller and the guy who sourced the whiskey and basically made the whiskey happen. The guy who founded the brand, I don't like to talk about much because he did some things that I don't agree with and is no longer involved in the whiskey business. He's doing brandy now and Armagnacs, and the less said about him, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I think WhistlePig is also very underrated in terms of what they're doing now that they're bottling their own stuff. I think what they're bottling is pretty good these days. The whiskey they're distilling in Vermont, the whiskey they were getting out of Alberta distillers in Canada was first rate. But I think that over time, we're going to find that the whiskey they're making in Vermont is even going to be even better, I think. At least I hope that's the way it did. As far as, from Juan Cruz. Without giving away much, where do you see WhiskyCast going in the upcoming years as you approach 20 years of podcasting, or where would you like to go? First, personally, I never thought we'd be doing this for 16 years, almost 17 in November. When I started out, if you'd told me that we'd still be doing this in 2022, I'd have laughed because I figured I would have gone on to another job and been working for someone else and collecting a paycheck and been thoroughly miserable. So where do I see it going in the upcoming years? I see more of the same for the podcast. I think we'll change some things around in formatting and music. We may change some of the segments around a little bit. I want to keep doing extensive in-depth interviews with people and bringing you those interviews. I think that's what really sets WhiskyCast apart from other whiskey podcasts. I want you to tell me, where would you like to see us go? What would you like to see us explore? And what would you like to see us do? We're getting some comments. Okay, from Christopher Malloy. Do you think the price hike with Macallan directly correlates to the cost of opening their new distillery, or is it actual demand? Well, they started jacking up prices long before the new distillery opened. Oh, by the way, that's on my bucket list too. I've not been to the new Macallan distillery. I would like to see it. But they were raising prices for the Macallan long before the new distillery opened. So I think it's based on demand. I think part of it's based on that sort of unobtainium status for the older Macallan expressions. And I'll leave it at that because I haven't bought a bottle of the Macallan in years. I've got some, obviously, but I haven't paid retail price for a bottle of the Macallan in years, and I don't see myself doing so anytime in the near future. With regards to that Glen Grant that Bill Ricker mentioned, maybe I'll let you have a second wee dram of it in November since it's his birthday bottle. He pegs the under over at 97 points. I'll take that challenge, Bill. We'll see what you come up with here. Let's see, other questions. From Tor Christensen, whose distillery I want to visit. Hope you'll continue doing the great job you're doing for 20 more at least. I hope so too. The good Lord willing, the creek don't rise, and as long as I stay healthy, I'm going to keep doing the show. So we're not going anywhere anytime soon. I'm just going to take a month or two off from doing the webcasts on Friday night, so that we can take a well-deserved break. The podcasts are going to come out each week. No chance of that taking a break, but I want to focus on that and dusting a bunch of these bottles behind me here. Chris Ratcliffe says, whoever called the new Macallan distillery Malt Disneyland is a genius. Yeah, I've heard it referred to as Malt Disney World, Malt Disneyland. Yeah, it's an amusement park for adults. From Christopher Malloy. Do you think the tendency to name American whiskeys after bootlegging and rebellions negatively affects the category? No, because Americans have always been sort of a rebellious lot. I don't think it hurts them. I think the decision that Luxco, which is owned by MGP now, did a year or so ago to rebrand Rebel Yell as Rebel Whiskey and take the Confederate branding away was a smart move on their part, because I don't think anybody wants anything to be associated with the Confederacy. And as far as bootlegging goes, yeah, there's this romance about bootlegging and moonshining, and it sort of works. I mean, we have a whiskey named after a guy who was virtually convicted of killing his wife in the George Remus brand. He was found innocent by reason of insanity, but who openly shot and killed his wife, and yet 6 decades later, they named a whiskey brand after him. Go figure. Let's see. Good question from Chris Ratcliffe here. As it's Pride Month, while there's been a focus in recent years on women in whiskey, has there been much focus on whiskey people or customers in the LGBTQ plus community? I've seen a couple of stories on the web this month about distilleries that are LGBTQ plus owned. And I'll tell you my take on it is that I haven't found the need to focus on it because I want to treat them like I want to treat people within the industry neutrally, regardless. I don't want to just have people on because they're LGBTQ plus. I don't want to have people on just because they're Black distillers or women in distilling. I want to have them on because they're distillers and focus on that and focus on the whiskeys. That may be a bit short-sighted on my part, but I know we have had people from the community on the show who don't make a big deal about it. And as long as they're not making a big deal about it, I'm not going to make a big deal about it. So my take on that is that we are open to everyone. This is a welcoming place and a welcoming community. And I'm not going to throw a spotlight on someone because they're LGBTQ plus. I'm not going to throw a spotlight on someone just because they're whatever group. I want to focus on them because they make good whiskey or because I want them to participate because of I want them to be part of the community because they're contributing to the whiskey fabric and to whiskey society. And I want to focus on that. Those that want to be out and proud, more power to you. And I applaud you and I stand with you and I support you. As Bill Ricker points out, yes, representation matters. It does. And what we try to do is bring people on. And if they will make a big deal about their status within a certain community, great. We'll do that. If they don't want to make a big deal about it, that's great too. It's whatever the people I'm bringing on want to talk about. If they want to talk about being a gay whiskey maker, hey, great, cool. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about prejudice within the industry. But I'm not going to bring somebody on and out them if they're not making a big deal about it themselves, if they're not open about it. And there are a lot of people who are within the industry who are open, and there are people in the industry who are closeted. And my point is I want to embrace everyone based on how they want to be embraced. And I hope that works. I hope that's what you're looking for. And let's move on from that point. Most prized moment from WhiskyCast 2022 so far. WhiskyCast 2022, the webcast, having Bill Samuels Jr. from Maker's Mark on back in, I think, late March, early April, because he doesn't do many interviews anymore, but he sat down with us for an hour to answer your questions. The show we did a couple of weeks ago from Ireland, going through the Biodynamic barley farm for Waterford Distillery was a fun one. I try to find something that I can prize out of each episode. If I can't find a good moment that I'm proud of in each episode, it means I didn't do my job properly. So I hope that satisfies the question. Let's see what else. Other questions. From Tyrone, it might be interesting to talk to the mayor and other people in some of the small towns that distilleries are located in to get their take on what a distillery means to their town or village. That's a great idea, Tyrone. As I travel around, I will take that into account and try to do more of the talking to folks in the local community about what having that distillery means to them. And I think that's a great idea. Thank you for the suggestion. Ian Bruce, have you ever thought about becoming involved with a new or existing distillery? No. First of all, I don't have that kind of money. Even sweat equity would be tough for me to put together to make that happen. So I'll leave it at that. I have no desire to make whiskey. I have no desire to be involved with a distillery. If I were involved with a distillery, it would make it hard for me to cover the industry neutrally as a journalist. I just don't think I could do it, which is why you've never seen us release a WhiskyCast label whiskey for that same reason. It would be hard for me to remain neutral when I'm out there competing with other independent bottlers and people in the industry. Let's see. Spirit Bomb, what was the funniest interview you've ever done? Oh, God. Yeah, that would have been about this time, about last fall when we had the Bourbon Women on, Peggy No Stevens, Maggie Kimbrell, and Heather Wibbles. One of the few times they made me blush. And yes, and yep. Malt Mariners, have you ever been thrown completely off guard in an interview? Yep, the three of them did that to me. Specifically when we talked about pairing whiskey with Girl Scout cookies, and Peggy No Stevens threatened to go get her Girl Scout uniform and put it on. Yeah, that threw me. Now, you're about to hear all hell break loose because I've been babysitting my daughter's dog, Poppy, for the last few days, and she's just come in to pick up the dog upstairs. And I fully expect Bader to start barking and raising hell here anytime soon. So you may hear dog barking in the background. Charles Epperson. Oh, yeah. Mark, your guests have been great. I would like to hear comments from the TTB on the various issues in the industry. Charles, so would I. We finally had, a couple of weeks ago, the very first interview I've ever done with anyone from the TTB in 17 years of doing WhiskyCast. And that was because I ambushed the deputy administrator at the Discus conference in New Orleans after a talk that he gave on things like American single malt and stuff like that, and where the industry is headed regulatory wise. Because every time I have requested an interview with someone from TTB, I have been turned down. Let it be known that the TTB executives and the administrators have a standing invitation. Anytime they want to come on the show, they are more than welcome. I would love to get somebody on from TTB to answer your questions, to answer some of my questions, to answer questions about how some of these labels get approved that probably shouldn't be, to answer questions about how the whole process works. I would love to have that happen. Once again, there's a standing invitation. They know it. They know they're welcome. All they have to do is say the word, and they're on the show. I will bump guests to make way for them if we have to. So we've done 40 minutes here. Let me pour a second dram. I have to admit this is going better than I thought it would. Once again, if you're joining us late, this is the Ask Mark Anything episode. And that's because the webcast is going to take the rest of July and August off. And we will be back in September with something, a slight reformatting. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but we'll figure something out and be back in January, or September rather. Bill Ricker goes, the labels. Things I've heard and can't repeat. Yep, you and me both. Question from Richard Dankovic. What was the worst sponsor that you had an offer from? I'm not going to name any sponsors that we've had offers from, but we reject more offers to sponsor WhiskyCast than we accept. And there are a lot we don't even talk to. The worst are the sponsored post folks, where I'll get an email saying, we'd like to sponsor a post on your website. All you have to do is link back to this website and we'll pay you. We'll pay whatever price you want. Just name your price. We don't do that. We don't do sponsored posts. We don't do pay-for-play content where anybody can pay us to write about their whiskey or anything like that, or post a story about a link in a story about something that has nothing to do with whiskey. So not going to happen. From Chris Ratcliffe, are live events like your one at Sagamore, I think, a breath of fresh air or a pain in the bum? They are a breath of fresh air. I love doing it because I love going out live. We would have done it a couple of weeks ago from the Doers US Open party, except for that blasted COVID virus. I love getting out of here as much as I love it in the studio. I love getting out because it gives me a chance to meet you guys and to have a lot more fun and talk to some people in person and get out of the studio. It's hard doing essentially Zoom interviews each week for this. And when I can get somebody in person and sit down for a good chat, I'd rather do that. So that's we are looking. One of the things we may do is we may try to do more live interviews and live webcasts on the Friday show. And that's one of the things we're certainly considering. From Spirit Bomb. What are your views on Irish-style American whiskey? Go for it. We have the Irish-American combination that the folks at Keeper's Heart are doing in Minneapolis. You have the stuff that coming out of Canada, an Irish-style whiskey that, out of Brooklyn, that the Irish Whiskey Association raised some hell about with Kings County Distillery. Talnua Distillery out in Colorado was making a very nice single pot still style whiskey in the Irish style from malted and unmalted barley. I think there's plenty of room for that. I think it's something that people need to explore. From Juan Cruz, in my opinion, I would say, and I truly mean it, that WhiskyCast is the best podcast. Without it, a lockdown and pandemic would have been extremely difficult to bear. Thank you to the entire WhiskyCast team. Thank you for the kind excuse me. Thank you for the kind words, Juan. I still have your book here and I have to get it to the post office and send it out. Hey, Mark, any chance you can do a happy hour at Pint's Pub in Denver? That's a great idea. If I can get out to Denver, we'll see what we can do about doing a happy hour at Pint's Pub. That's a great idea. Thank you for the suggestion. Let's see, from Chris Ratcliffe. New format, last whiskey tonight. Yeah, I love John Oliver. I'd be glad to do something like that, but Oliver doesn't have guests on his show, and I think you guys would prefer to see some of that. I think you guys would rather hear John Oliver rather than just me talking for 45 minutes like I've done right now. Tabitha has applause for Juan Cruz. From Christopher Malloy, have you ever been confronted by a manufacturer over a negative review? No, not that I know of. Nobody's ever come back to me and criticized me. The folks at PBR certainly didn't when I blasted them publicly and called their whiskey swill and gave it 40 points. They still send me news releases about, I got one just the other day about this god-awful massive pack of like 1,800 bottles of whiskey that they put together for the world's largest whiskey six-pack or something like that. From Whiskey Canuck, what up-and-coming regional whiskey scene are you the most enthusiastic about? I can't wait to see the creativity from American single malts once we get some standards on what defines an American single malt. I would love to see that. I think the European whiskey scene is also really amazing. I can't wait to see what else is being done in Scandinavia. Tor Christensen jumped in earlier. Distilleries like his in Norway and Sweden and Finland are making some really cool whiskeys that I'd love to try more of and would love to expose to more people on the show. There's even some South American whiskeys that I have yet to try that I'd love to find out more about. So I think there's all sorts of whiskey scenes that I'm enthusiastic about. Christopher Malloy, WhiskyCast Coast to Coast. Yeah, I like this idea. I have had a dream for probably 10 years or so, what I would love to do. And if anybody has a connection to like an Airstream or an RV maker of some kind, I'd love to have some help with this one. What I would love to do is take one of these Airstream van conversions, like the Sprinter type vans, where it's all self-contained in one rig, or a self-contained RV, and start up on the East Coast of the US and just go coast to coast across the country, visiting distilleries and small distilleries, large distilleries, and doing webcasts along the way and talking to various people at the distilleries and maybe doing one every other night or so and just do a WhiskyCast coast to coast trip. I would love to do that. As Tabitha points out, English whiskey seems to be getting better these days too. Absolutely. The English whiskey scene is also improving. It's another one I'm enthusiastic about. For me and Bruce, would you do a future over a few days from other countries like Japan or Australia, similar to the Irish trip? Better believe it. We've done them from Australia. I've not been to Japan yet, but yes, absolutely. I would love to do more features like that. What are your thoughts on E150A and chill filtration and minimal strength bottlings? Why do manufacturers like Bowmore refuse to change with the times? I can't speak to the second question. But as far as the first one, I hate caramel coloring and I don't like chill filtration. Minimum strength bottlings, I think minimum strength ought to be 46%. But if somebody has to bottle at 40 for whatever reason, fine. I'm okay with 40 if that's what you have to bottle at. But yeah, I can live with that. But I would prefer the stronger the better to me. I would like something between 46% and cask strength. Ian Bruce suggests just go touring with a musician or band who loves whiskey or bourbon. That's fine, but I would have to like their music to be able to do that. And after a few days, I think it probably would get on my nerves, and I'd probably get on their nerves. Charles Epperson, I have an upcoming vacation to Sweden. Any recommendations for a distillery tour? Yeah, Macmira in Gavle is a good tour. Also High Coast, further north. I'm forgetting the town they're located in. But yeah, High Coast, those are the two I know that offer tours. Those are the two I've been to, but I would go to both of those. As Bill Ricker says, road trip, yep. And 43% is good for sipping, 40% is for mixing. I like that thinking, but there are some that are at 40% that aren't ever going to change, and fine, I'll live with them at whatever they think it's best at. If the distillers and the blenders think it's best at 40%, I'm not going to argue with them. And if they want to put caramel coloring in, I'm not going to argue with that because a few drops of E150A is not going to make a difference. You can't taste it. Would I prefer it without caramel coloring? Yeah, but I'll take what I can get. Christopher Malloy says, I think all American single malts should be 50%. I could live with that. We could get the TTB to write that into the regulations that American single malt has to be bottled at no less than 50% ABV. I'd go for that. As Ricker points out, why import water in general? That goes for Fiji and Vichy too. Yeah, I see no need to import water. But even so, even at cask strength, 40% of it is still water. Spirit Bomb. What is your favorite whiskey cocktail apart from an old-fashioned? My whiskey cocktail is usually an ounce and a half of whiskey in a Glencairn with 5 drops of water. I'm not a cocktail person. I can drink an old-fashioned. I'll drink whiskey cocktails if somebody else is making them, but I'm not going to make them. I don't have time, and I can't do it as well as a bartender can. And besides, I enjoy it this way. So and Malt Manor's got to tap out here. I'm meeting with friends to explore the Hopscotch, a full-on whiskey bar in Toulouse. Can't wait. I'll catch up tomorrow. Good night, everyone. Good night, good night, Malt Mariners and Sláinte, and tell everybody at the Hopscotch that we're thinking of them and say hello. Let's see. From Richard Dankovic, how have your tastes in whiskey changed over the years, and with the broadening of your horizons due to your WhiskyCast adventures? What are your favorites in bygone years that have fallen out of favor with you? I can't say any that have fallen out of favor because I still go back and explore some of them from time to time, and I like those older whiskeys too. None have fallen out of favor. It's just that I spend my time tasting all the new ones that come out. Let's see here. Christopher Malloy, can you see a day where Scotch whiskey is shipped to the U.S. at cask strength to be diluted and bottled here to save on shipping costs? Not unless you change the laws in Scotland, because right now the law in Scotland for single malts requires that it be bottled in Scotland. They're already shipping blends over. William Grant & Sons has a blending plant in New Jersey, or bottling plant in New Jersey, that they ship blends over in bulk and bottle them here. They do the same in Australia with blends. It's perfectly legal to ship totes full of blended Scotch outside of Scotland and bottle it there. So they're doing that to save on shipping costs. But for single malts, I don't see that ever changing. Ian Bruce, how did people in the USA feel when the bottle size was changed? I don't think we've seen a fallout yet because most bottles haven't really changed from 75 CLs to 70 CLs. There are a few that are selling at 70 right now, but you haven't seen the big boys like the Beams and those folks, the big distillers, reducing the size of their current bottlings from 750s down to 700 ml size. So we really haven't seen a backlash yet on those. And the folks that are getting 70 CL bottles know what they're getting and haven't really objected to it. As far as I know, I haven't heard any objections. Let's see. Tyrone Cote has to sign off. Time to go watch some Canada Day fireworks. Is it dark there yet? I know you're an hour ahead of us, but you're also farther north, Tyrone. It can't be that dark yet in time for fireworks. Christopher Malloy, have you tasted any of Diageo's whiskeys in those new cardboard cartons? No, I haven't. They're not being sold on the market yet. I believe there's some being tested in Europe, but I have not seen them or had the chance to try them yet. I'd love to see if it makes a difference. I doubt it will. I suspect if it made a difference, they wouldn't be doing it. And Bill Ricker, who points out that he's starting to get 70 CLs from France. He works for a French importer. Supply chain issues with glass are making 75 CL bottles hard. So, yeah, they are getting 70 CLs, but I don't think there's been a backlash yet. And I don't really think there will be too much of one. I doubt if people will notice. Jordy Mosky wants to know, have you heard anything further on the Great Whiskey Raid? I'm assuming you're talking about the Glenfarclas break-in, and no, there hasn't been any progress on solving that yet. Tyrone says he has to hop on a boat. He's watching them from Halifax Harbor. Okay, Tyrone, enjoy the boat ride. Don't get seasick. Let's see. Charles Epperson, are blends on the rise versus single malts? It seems to me it's becoming a trend again. Well, it's becoming more affordable. We're starting to see some swings back towards affordability as inflation is jacking up the prices of single malts. Blends are still relatively affordable, so I think that's where you might see blends becoming more popular again. Keep in mind, blends still make up 90% of the Scotch whiskey market worldwide. So while single malts have picked up a point or two, they still aren't nearly as popular as blends by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, Jordy Mosky, meaning the one in Vancouver with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. No, last I heard that was still tied up in the court system in the British Columbia courts. I know that the court ordered that Fett's Whiskey Kitchen be given access to some of the BC Liquor Distribution Board's paperwork and internal memos on that thing for their defense. But that's all I've heard in terms of the latest. Christopher Malloy, please make the distinction between blended scotches and blended malts. Just a second here. That's easy. This is Johnny Walker Green Label. It is a blended malt Scotch whiskey. Blended malt means there's no grain whiskey from places like North British Distillery or Cameron Bridge. There's no grain whiskey that's distilled in column stills that's blended into this. A blended Scotch has both grain whiskey and malt whiskey put into the blend. The grain whiskey is what's distilled in a column still. Malt whiskeys are distilled in pot stills. If it's only pot still whiskey, then it's a blended malt whiskey. So that's the difference between blended Scotches and blended malts. And Christopher Malloy thinks blended malts are underexploited. I would agree with you on that. Same thing with single grain whiskeys and blended grain whiskeys. It's 95 degrees Fahrenheit out today, and I think a single grain or a blended grain would be perfect for sipping with an ice cube outside if I'm sitting on the front porch today, rather than a single malt or a heavier bourbon. I'd rather sip a nice light single grain and get that taste rather than get the heaviness of a single malt or a bourbon without that. I'd rather get that grain component in. And Spirit Bomb agrees with me. Grain whiskeys are delicious on their own too. Bill Ricker, Compass Box's hedonism, blended grain Scotch or hedonism, very tasty. Yes, absolutely. And Chris Ratcliffe points out some people have issues with the name. Vatted blend is gone. Yeah, blended malts used to be called vatted malts. The Scotch Whisky Law of 2009 got rid of the term vatted. So now everything has to be referred to as a blended malt. Compass Box hated that. Came out with the last vatted malt that they released at 11:55, 5 minutes of midnight, the day of the deadline. So they came out with that as a snarky move. Have you heard about the new Leith distillery, which is going to be vertical? Is this a new initiative being? No, McMurray's distillery is also vertical, where the distillery is built up and they start at the top. They bring the grain into the top of the distillery. They cook it, and then they use gravity to feed the mash on down to the fermenters, then use gravity to feed the fermenters and the fermenter output to the stills, and then gravity to feed the condensers, and then bring out the final spirit at the bottom and barrel it there. That's a vertical distillery. And I think you may see more of those because it also lends itself well to space considerations, especially like Leith, where they're building that distillery in the port, and you've got limited land space. You can build up instead of out. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. As Bill Ricker points out, blended malt is where value is in Scotch today. Spirit Bomb, the new Glenmorangie experimental distillery is vertical too, isn't it? I got to admit, I haven't seen it. I don't know the answer to that one. I haven't seen the new distillery there. I haven't seen pictures of it, nor have I been there, so I can't really answer that question. Thoughts on that 3-column still rye? Three distilled rye that's the one from Leopold Brothers. I've only tried it in the blend with Dickel, the collaboration rye that they put out in collaboration, where they blended some Dickel distilled rye with the Leopold Brothers 3-chamber rye. So I haven't tasted it on its own yet, so I really couldn't give you an answer on that one. And Charles Epperson, Senior Wisers 23, I grabbed my Wisers 18. Happy Canada Day. Happy Canada Day to you and to everyone out there. Let's see if there's any other questions. Christopher Malloy, thanks, Mark. I don't think everyone understands that. Jordy, you may have covered this already, but has anything this year replaced Fish Key on your list? Nothing this year. The Pabst Blue Ribbon whiskey was last year, so nothing this year has gotten that low. And personally, I hope to never taste anything that bad again. Whiskey Canuck, when I hear vertical distillery, my first thought was column still. That's understandable. That's very understandable because people see these tall column stills and they think vertical. But what you can do with a vertical still is take the grain to the top and then, as I said before, use gravity instead of pumps to feed it down. You can use one set of augers to get the grain up to the top, but then you save money on pumps, on electricity, on energy usage, and having to pump all the liquid around in the mash by just letting gravity take those flows down. I think we're going to call it a night here. So once again, I want to thank you for all of the questions. We've gone an hour, and thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. WhiskyCast wouldn't be possible without you, and I want to thank all of our sponsors as well, especially Dewar's and Redbreast, because they make the weekly live shows possible. Once again, we are going to take the rest of July and August off from the webcasts. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate your comments, and I look forward to seeing you in Fredericton in November for the New Brunswick Spirits Festival. Maybe we'll do more of these Ask Mark Anything ones. Maybe that's something we'll do more of in the future as well. But thank you for the questions. Thank you for the kind words in the comments. Have a great Canada Day if you're in Canada. Enjoy the 4th of July weekend for those of you in the States and the long holiday weekend. Hopefully it's a bank holiday weekend where you are otherwise. So take care of yourselves, be good to each other, and we'll see you down the road soon. Take care. Good night, all.